This public hearing on the Joint Standing Committee on the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties for its inquiry into the security agreement between the Australian Government and the Organisation for Joint Armament Cooperation, OCCAR, on the protection of classified information. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the lands in which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. I also extend that respect to any First Nations people who might be joining us today. In accordance with the committee's resolution of 4 August 2022, this hearing will be broadcast, and proof and official transcripts of the proceeding will also be published on the Parliament's website. I remind all members of the media of the need for fair and accurate reporting of the proceedings of the committee. I'd now like to welcome representatives of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trades, Department of Defence and Department of Home Affairs to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you are appearing before the committee?
Peter West, First Assistant Secretary of Defence Security.
Mr Murray Barton, Acting Director, Material Logistics Function and OCCAR Office Manager.
Chris Coles, Strategic Business Advisor, Department of Defence.
Naomi Mason, Treaties Manager, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Simone Peace, Acting Executive Director of Material Logistics in Capability Acquisition and Sustainment Group.
Damien Vandertorn, I'm Legal Advisor in the Department of Defence.
Simon Buckley, Assistant Secretary, Security Policy and Services, Department of Defence.
Tim Neal, Assistant Secretary, Government Cyber and Protected Security, the Department of Home Affairs.
Thank you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standings as the proceedings of the respective houses. The giving of false and misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. It is the responsibility of witnesses to accurately record any questions taken on notice. I'd now like to invite you to make an opening statement before we proceed to members' questions.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair, Deputy Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the security agreement between the Government of Australia and the Organisation for Joint Armament Cooperation, known by its French acronym of OCCAR, on the protection of classified information. I'm appearing today with colleagues from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Department of Home Affairs, Defence Capability Acquisition and Sustainment Group and Defence Legal. As First Assistant Secretary of Defence Security in the Department of Defence, I'm responsible for the establishment and maintenance of security of information agreements and arrangements with international partners, and it was my staff which led the negotiations resulting in the security agreement with OCCAR before you today. The security agreement will facilitate the exchange of classified information up to the level of Australian secret between Australia and OCCAR in connection with OCCAR defence capability programs. The security agreement addresses a key provision of the framework agreement between OCCAR and the Government of Australia for participation of Australia in OCCAR managed programs, which entered into force on 25 January 2022. The framework agreement establishes the legal framework required to enable Australia's formal participation in OCCAR managed programs as a non-member state. The framework agreement provides interim measures for the mutual protection of classified information pending the conclusion of a security agreement. OCCAR is an intergovernmental organisation founded by France, Germany, Italy and the United Kingdom, and subsequently expanded to include Belgium and Spain. OCCAR's primary task is to manage cooperative defence programs through their life cycle in the most efficient way in terms of cost, schedule and performance for the benefit of its member states and non-member participating states, which currently includes Australia, Finland, Turkey, Lithuania, Poland, the Netherlands, Norway and Greece. OCCAR also has formal partnerships with key European and European-based organisations, including the European Commission, the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation Support and Procurement Agency, and the European Defence Agency within the European Union. Australia is currently a non-participating member state in the OCCAR lightweight torpedo program to support our MU-90 lightweight torpedo capability, and holds observer status in OCCAR's Tiger helicopter and Boxer armoured vehicle programs. The security agreement will be implemented in Australia principally via the Government Protective Security Policy Framework and the Defence Security Principles Framework. The security agreement will enable the sharing of classified information with OCCAR and its individual programs, and allow Australia to take full advantage of our relationships with OCCAR. The security agreement sets out the mechanisms and safeguards for how classified information should be handled, including requirements around who can handle or hold information. These mechanisms include classification equivalencies and information handling requirements, mutual recognition and facility security of personnel and facility security clearances, and allocating responsibility between OCCAR and Australia for assessment and assurance purposes when contractors are engaged in projects that involve classified information. The security agreement raises no international defence policy issues. It aligns with Australia's existing strategic and defence relationships in Europe and offers opportunities to further enhance defence cooperation with Europe and to broaden interoperability among a like-minded group of defence forces. I seek your recommendation to Parliament that Australia should take binding treaty action in respect of the security agreement. Myself and my colleagues would be happy to take any questions that the committee members may have.
Thank you for that opening statement. And as you probably know, this is the only hearing that we've got on this particular treaty. So unlike AUKUS, this one hasn't attracted the same level of interest. But I do have a couple of questions, and then I'll go to my fellow committee members to see if they've got questions. Is there any history to why we needed to take this next step? Like, why is this agreement now necessary?
Thank you very much. It's now necessary because under our framework agreement, as I expressed earlier, it is actually a requirement that we put in place a security agreement to allow us to continue to exchange information with OCCAR. In the absence of this security agreement, we would reach a point under the framework agreement where we would be deemed no longer to be in compliance with that framework agreement and would no longer be able to exchange classified information, including in programs in which we're currently participating, as I mentioned, such as the lightweight torpedo program.
You mentioned another one, the Boxer program. There's been a lot of I guess, positive noise around the Boxer program, because that's one of the contracts that has been entered into for us as a country to supply into Europe. Does this agreement in any way support or enhance, or is that just an example of what can be achieved if we were to enter into the OCCAR treaty?
This agreement is absolutely critical to supporting our engagement with that program. Again, in the absence of this agreement, we wouldn't be able to exchange any classified information, which is absolutely critical when you're talking about defence capability. But I might ask my colleagues from Capability Acquisition and Sustainment Group to comment on the Boxer program more specifically.
Chris?
I'm happy to say a few words about that. Australia is not actually participating in OCCAR's Boxer program. It is an observer only. So the security agreement with OCCAR won't directly affect the provision of Boxers by Rheinmetall in Brisbane. That would be a separate arrangement. But Mr West is correct in the sense that this will facilitate wider exchange of information on similar capability in Europe.
I guess that leads me to my next question then. Are there any sort of future OCCAR managed programs that Australia plans to participate in?
Again, I'll refer that to my CASG colleagues.
So beyond the ones that have been spoken about, there are several programs of interest, but not yet formally engaged with. But again, I'll hand over to you, Chris.
That's pretty much it. We have observer status in 2 programs. There is some overlap with other capability, but there's nothing firm in terms of actually participating in those OCCAR programs.
But I'd certainly just add, having this agreement in place creates opportunities to engage with those programs in a much more meaningful way in the future if we decide to go down that path.
Very much.
And if there wasn't a formal agreement in place, is it a product by product, for the lack of a better word, negotiation?
Yes, it'd be bilateral, but I'll again refer that to my co-chair colleague.
So yes, program by program, but it's also relying on interim security assurances, not formalised.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think one of the benefits of this treaty is that we will no longer have to do these sort of ad hoc security assurances. The treaty, this security agreement, will, effectively replace the need for those.
Are there any other countries going down this path that are going from observer status to treaty action?
I'm unsure. Chris?
There are numerous European countries who are participating in programs or preparing to participate, who are all required to enter into an equivalent security agreement in order to allow them to participate as fully as we would as a participating state.
And why now? Why is this, like, I'm not sure in the history of OCCAR. It sounds like it's been around for a while. Is it because of the changing nature of what's going on in Europe, or is it because of the level of sophistication from other nations when it comes to information sharing?
Our engagement with OCCAR has been evolving for some time, and that has been a process of gradual growth of engagement with OCCAR. As I said, we entered into a framework agreement in 2022, so it is quite critical we follow those requirements up from that framework agreement. But it, as I said earlier, it does provide opportunities to further grow the relationship with OCCAR in the future as we define new acquisition and capability opportunities.
Some of the criticism that we had in relation to AUKUS, and I appreciate it's an entirely different treaty, but if more people were aware of this, they might flag it with us, is the impact that these treaties have on Australia's sovereignty and our ability to, make decisions that in relation to Australian sovereignty. And if we have these treaties in place, some of the concerns is that we would be bound to those nations if they choose to participate in conflict or engagement. Does this treaty in any way impact Australia's sovereign capability, or imply kind of coordination, collaboration or support if conflict was to arise in other countries?
I will get my DFAC colleague to speak to that in just a second, but I just note in terms of obligations under this treaty, the obligations are mutual obligations, that really it's about Europe protecting any classified information we give them, and them protecting us protecting their classified information to the same standard. So there is obviously obligations on us, but they are mutual obligations and they are mutually beneficial obligations, so that we both have assurance that our most sensitive information is being protected as we work on these capabilities jointly together. But I'll ask my DFAT colleague to speak to the...
Do you want me to do it?
Or Defence Legal?
No, I'm happy to do it. I think the short answer to the second part of the question, which is about does it oblige us to, go to the assistance of other countries if there were conflicts or anything like that, I think the short answer to that is definitely not. This treaty is purely just about Australia and this organisation, OCCAR, exchanging classified information, and it doesn't do anything further than that. So it's very, very. It's nothing to do with the things that you've been talking about in the AUKUS space or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just sort of preempting what might or may be raised at a later stage, I guess. The other question that I just had was in relation to defence industries, or the Australian defence industry in particular. It talks about the national interest analysis, stating that ratifying this agreement will provide opportunities for the Australian defence industry. Could you just expand on that, and if there's been sort of any analysis or, cost-benefit analysis of what that could mean or could be?
So it opens up opportunities in two key ways. One, it allows us to participate in these programs at the same level with other partners in the program. And also, one of the greatest barriers to industry, Australian industry participating, particularly in foreign programs, is security barriers. That the fact that foreign countries don't feel able to share information, and we are not able to help industry with meeting. We have challenges helping industry meet foreign security requirements. So this clarifies those security arrangements and will make it much easier for industry to engage with European counterparts on a range of capability programs, but obviously very specifically OCCAR programs. But I might ask my CASG colleagues if they would like to add anything.
I think that covers it. It just allows Australian industry, if there was an opportunity in an OCCAR program, to participate and share, both share and receive information.
Could you provide us with any examples, or is it sort of, or maybe something that's happened previously that could have been fast-tracked through a OCCAR arrangement if we had this treaty in place?
Under the current observer status of the programs that we're involved in and the participation of Australia in the MU-90, I believe that Thales, who serve as the maintenance provider for our MU-90 torpedo, do interact with OCCAR in terms of maintenance of that capability. And this, we currently operate under a security agreement that is an assurance by another member state of OCCAR.
So this should streamline Thales's security requirements and security costs as a result of this treaty, but hopefully more broadly it will provide opportunities in other OCCAR programs, the opportunity for Australian industry to engage in other OCCAR programs.
So that's sort of, I guess, really important when it's sort of, you know, Europe or these country designed equipment that we are then purchasing that then will help, I guess, our country be able to maintain them or do that work locally. Is that sort of what I'm sort of understanding? What about the other way around? So Bushmasters, for example, and I'm not flagging them just because I'm the federal member for Bendigo, but is that an example of how it gives Australian-based industry that opportunity to then sort of share work with counterparts that are part of OCCAR to be able to purchase more, maintain more, and I guess have that as an opportunity for Australian defence industry?
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, Bushmaster is not a OCCAR program, but more generally, you know, where there are opportunities. So, for example, you know, where Australia has an OCCAR capability, I'm sure if Australian industry could demonstrate a particular advantage in terms of cost, efficiency or capability, having this OCCAR agreement in place opens up the avenues for them to engage with European partners to discuss that, and through what would otherwise normally be constrained by classification issues, and potentially opens up opportunities for those partners to engage Australian industry as part of the program where we can demonstrate that we would add value.
Yeah, so there's that real opportunity for what might be locally grown, locally manufactured Australian defence capability to be able to, through this agreement, potentially grow a market in Europe.
Security is often a significant barrier to international cooperation. Often, I think it'd be fair to say it can sometimes be used by overseas competitors spuriously as well to prevent Australian industry from entering overseas markets. So having clear arrangements like this in place lowers the barriers for Australian industry and allows them to at least deal with the security issue very quickly and open up opportunities to discuss how they could participate in capability programs.
Is the potential market a different market? Like, is it looking more of that sort of the drone technology, that ability to manoeuvre people in and out quickly? Like, is it something that Australia has had a strength in up until now?
The market would depend on what programs OCCAR is pursuing at any given time. OCCAR chooses to pursue specific programs. Some member states choose to pursue programs within the OCCAR framework. Sometimes they pursue programs outside the OCCAR framework. I am not aware, I don't know whether any of my colleagues could say whether there's any drone programs currently in the OCCAR portfolio.
There's a very large medium to high altitude drone being developed in OCCAR. It's called the Euro drone. It's a very large aircraft, but nothing smaller than that as yet.
I guess the final question I have before I see if my colleagues have questions, has the war in the Ukraine changed OCCAR's approach towards not just their relationship to, say, countries like Australia, but their relationship towards other countries in the region and Australia? And has it also changed the programs that they're pursuing?
I don't think we'd say that we've seen significant change through OCCAR itself. I think the agreement, having the agreement in place will be helpful. Obviously, our European allies are learning considerable lessons from what's happening in the Ukraine. A lot of that will be at a classified level, so being able to gain access to and share some of that information will be very useful to our own capability development. But I don't think we have seen particularly significant change in the way OCCAR approaches these issues, or I think it's fair to say across Europe there's a more focused mindset on capability acquisition. Would any of my colleagues like to add anything?
Hey, I'll just see if the Deputy Chair has any questions.
I do. Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming today. I just wanted to pick up on something you touched on just before when the Chair asked around the Boxer, and I believe you said we're an observer. Can we not be an observer under this treaty, or does something have to start prior or after a treaty's done to go from observer sitting in the in the corner table rather than be a part of the sharing of these sensitive and secret information?
Being an observer is really quite limited in the sense that it is about sharing information about a certain capability, in this case the Boxer. We are not participating in OCCAR's program in the sense that we are not benefiting from their contracts with, I believe Artec is the company in Europe of which Rheinmetall is a part. So we do stand outside those contractual arrangements. If we become a participating state, we would then have to enter into the contractual arrangements that are in place, which would be a significant investment. Australia is acquiring the Boxer directly from Rheinmetall rather than as a part of the OCCAR program. So it is generally a stepped process, as you mentioned. Generally, a non-member state would become an observer for a period of time, after which it can decide whether to participate or otherwise. But at this particular case, with the Boxer, there is no proposal at this point to participate in the program under those OCCAR contractual arrangements.
Excellent, and thank you for that. And I think you believe that you said something about the Tiger helicopter. Will that all change now since Australia has shifted from the Tiger to the Apache?
At this particular point in time, Australia is an observer in the Tiger program, and in the short term, and we can say it until the end of the life of type, Australia wishes to remain an observer. There is very useful information that can be shared with the other user states of the Tiger, but of course there is a limited life span for the Tiger now, and there would be no requirement after that point to continue as an observer.
Excellent, Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. We'll now go to the member for Spence. Thank you, Mr. Bennell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for providing evidence today. I've got a few questions. and I might have missed this in your opening statement, but Article 6 2B requires Australia to nominate an authority responsible for implementing and overseeing security measures at contractor facilities. Who will this authority be?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're referring to Article 6 2B, I believe that's mentions a competent authority for contractor facilities. That in Australia would be Defence Security Division.
That is my division, Defence Security Division, and the Defence Industry Security Program.
Perfect, thank you. Outside of an investigation, are there any repercussions for parties that may be responsible for repeated or significant losses, breaches or compromises of sensitive information?
Yes, at the Australian end, obviously, for individuals, they face the loss of potential loss of security clearance. For companies, they face the potential loss of access to classified information and systems, which in most cases would significantly inhibit their ability to fulfil a contract. Therefore, it would be questionable whether they could continue with the contract. Obviously, at the European end, if they believe we have breached security, they can take action to either recall their classified information or limit our access to classified information in future.
No, thank you.
I was just going to add one thing quickly, which is that the treaty does have a provision around how to deal with loss and compromise of classified information as well. Yeah.
Perfect. Article 10. It states parties are responsible for their own costs in implementing the agreement. Are there any indications on what the likely cost of implementation will be?
At this stage, we're not sort of foreseeing any cost really, except for the costs that that already exist in running security programs in
So
Australia.
industry would be so as I mentioned during my opening statement, this will be implemented in Australia largely through the Protective Security Policy Framework and the Defence Security Principles Framework, and under the Defence Security Principles Framework sits the Defence Industry Security Framework. There is costs associated with meeting DISP requirements, which industry would have to meet if they were ultimately going to meet the provisions of this treaty. So things like cyber security uplift, physical security, security clearances. But in terms of implementation of the treaty itself, we're not aware of any costs.
Right, thank you. And my last question pertains to Article 13. I note that it says that under item 3, parties may terminate this agreement at any time by mutual agreement in writing and shall consult to establish the effective date of termination. Either party may terminate the agreement in writing subject to a notice period of 6 months being given to the other party. Is that a standard length of time? Is it usually longer or is it shorter? Like for a like type of a treaty?
For a treaty of this sort, dealing with security of information, I think that's a fairly standard provision or standard length of time. It's really up to the parties to the treaty to determine what that should be.
I believe that's the standard period of time that we have in our draft agreements that we initially start with. The reason for that is obviously, since we're dealing with classified and sensitive information, we need a reasonable period of time to both retrieve and assure ourselves of the status of any classified information before the treaty is concluded.
So is there potentially a need to have that period longer, or you think that 6 months is ample time?
As I say, 6 months is the standard period we put in these sorts of agreements, and not that anyone's ever exercised it, but certainly with what I would call sophisticated partners that we have in Europe, that is more than enough time to conclude any residual matters before the treaty was ended.
Okay. That's it from me, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just had one more. And look, I do appreciate your patience because this isn't a topic matter that we're all engaged in each and every day. I appreciate it's probably something that you live each and every day. But just sort of going back to this European organisation and how it's actually established, is it the key member countries? Is it established through their parliaments? Is it established through their joint countries and cooperations? The reason why I ask is it is quite different to a number of the treaties that we deal with. Usually, our treaties are with the government of the United Kingdom, the government of Canada. So this one isn't. It's with an organisation that's made up of member organisations. So I guess who technically owns the organisation?
Okay, so OCCAR itself is an international organisation, right? So it is created by the member states through them agreeing to establish OCCAR in a treaty. So that treaty still exists. And that treaty governs basically how OCCAR functions and its responsibilities and the roles of the member states, how countries like Australia, who are non-member participating states, can also participate in the organisation. So it's basic, at its most basic, it is an organisation established by a treaty between states, yeah.
So for us to ratify this particular treaty, it goes through our parliament, we make a recommendation back to government, and we go forward from there. Yep. Do each of these current member organisations need to do the same?
Chris, do you want to answer that?
It has to go through the OCCAR Board of Supervisors, which is made up of the national armaments directors of each of the member states. So effectively, those member states have to approve the treaty, and it is signed then by the director of OCCAR, who is effectively an international civil servant. So OCCAR itself is created by the convention, and that convention gives it international legal personality, and that gives it the authority to sign international documents. Would that be right, Damien?
Yeah, that's right.
And do any one of those countries have veto power?
Yeah, all of them. It has to be. It has to be unanimous. Correct.
Yeah, and have they ever, in your knowledge, vetoed a treaty or an agreement of this nature before?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And when the member for Spence was asking about the termination provisions, do they all have to agree to terminate, or if one country has a change of heart, can they push for termination?
Well, I imagine the termination would have to be by OCCAR itself as the international organisation, and that decision would have to be made in accordance with its own internal rules. So imagine that is through the board of member states as well.
Yeah, I'd have to take the details of that on notice, but it would be a very similar process, I would imagine.
Possibly all member states would have to agree to terminate this treaty.
We'll take that on notice just to confirm, but we believe that to be the case.
Yeah. Do you know in any of the member states if there's been any concern raised about OCCAR? Looking at those member states, we had always assumed they were pretty stable: Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and the United Kingdom. But at this stage, has there been any concern raised within their equivalent parliaments concern about OCCAR?
I don't think we're aware of any concerns being raised.
Correct.
That's all the questions that I had, and if you could get that one back to us on notice, that would be helpful, just about
the termination. Yes,
how a termination could occur. Does it need to be unanimous, or can one nation trigger that? I'll just double check. I don't believe the Deputy Chair, members for Spence, they don't have any further questions. So I will just do the final words at the end. So thank you for your attendance today. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence and will have the opportunity to request corrections to transcript errors. Please send your response to any questions on notice. I believe there was only one. to the Secretariat by the close of business on the 14th of November 2024. I now declare this public hearing closed, and